is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Deadwood, Season 2, Episode 2, A Lie Agreed Upon, Part 2. In this episode, Calamity Jane returns to camp. Oh, Jane, I didn't even know how much I missed you until you came back. And it looks like both Seth and Alma have realized that their responsibilities outweigh their feelings for one another. How very responsible, but also it makes me sad. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Many thanks again to Patrick for commissioning this episode directly after the first one, so I was able to watch 2 episodes of Deadwood in a row, which I never get to do, and that was super fun. It almost made me be able to pretend that I could binge it. This episode is in a lot of ways like it's less exciting than the first one in some ways because of the fact that everybody is still dealing with the fallout of the first. And so you're seeing a lot more people like sitting and assessing what they owe and who they owe it to. And that's not as much fun to watch, strictly speaking, as like an action heavy episode. But I kind of liked it better than the first one because of how much character stuff comes into play when you decide that you're going to have your people sit down and really think through what they're going to do next. You get to find out a lot more about who they are and what their priorities and their plans are. And I'm always really interested in the psychology of characters. So that's something that I find really like compelling and outweighs, if it's done well, action sequences for me. Although I do love myself some action sequences, don't get me wrong. If I'm going to choose a movie to go and see at the theaters, I'm definitely going to pick an action film almost always, because like, and that's actually been my problem lately, and I'll come back to the topic at hand shortly, I swear. But like, I know how many people talk about like the American public just going for like big blockbuster popcorn movies and not wanting to see like thoughtful projects. But the truth is, the world is an absolute trash fire. And most of us go to the movies to have fun, and watching something that's somewhat heavy and thought-provoking often translates to something that's like emotional or depressing outright. And many of us just don't want to be doing that during our fun spare time. We want to go into something and see good actually get to win and be able to fist pump and generally escape from the world. And so I will tend to go for those kinds of escapist movies if I have a choice. But it's in direct like conflict with what I actually love about art like this, which is the emotional aspect. I think I have less of a problem with it on television because there can be such a variety of tones from one episode to another that if you have a really emotional episode, you can follow it up, 45 minutes later with something that's a lot more like upbeat and exciting. But in a movie, the tone that they choose is often the tone of the film overall, and that feels like a big commitment to me. So, yeah, it's a conflict that I deal with within myself a lot. Anyway, so this episode, we start off with Al, who his ribs are busted and he is getting wrapped up by Doc, and he is in bad fucking shape. This dude, like, he has so many lumps on his face as well that he looks like he has some kind of disease. And he is in a foul temper for most of this episode because of the combo of what's going on in his piping, in his plumbing, I guess is the word. Piping sounds like, his suit didn't get tailored properly. but yeah, his broken ribs, his busted face, his anatomy giving him trouble, and also the bad news that Silas brought to him just a few hours earlier by the, measure of this show. He's in here with Doc, who's trying to talk to him about what his symptoms are. The Doc is trying to assess what stage he's in, if there's anything that can be given to help his pain, all of this. And they get interrupted by EB. Y'all, I don't know how this show makes me despise E.B. Farnham more and more every time I see his horrible little face. And I don't mean the actor's face. It's not him. Like, he's not actually a horrible looking guy. They just have him done up in such a way as to be really, like, creepy. And the expression on his face and the way that he talks. Oh my God, y'all. I can't. I hate him. Like, and it's not even that I hate him. Like, I don't hate him the way that I hate Cy Tolliver. I despise him. I feel like a combination of dislike and sort of like pity, I guess, and revulsion. So it's a whole mess of feelings. And he comes in and says something about how, like, well, I just want you to know that that he has gone to see the widow, Seth has. I don't know if they're in rut, is the way that he says it, but I didn't stay to hear the song of the bedstead. And he sort of grins at Al like he's made this great joke, but when Al doesn't turn around or smile or anything, he just walks out finally. And I cannot tell you how delighted I am by the look on Doc Cochran's face. Like, he's looking away from EB, and it seems to me like he's practicing some sort of deep breathing exercise to keep his fucking lunch down. Because he genuinely looks like he's like nauseated by the presence of this man. And after EB leaves, he gives himself a sort of shake, like, okay, it's all over now. Come back to yourself. And it's great. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Doc Cochran is just so great. And then we cut to Sophia, who is laying down and sort of pretending to be asleep, I feel like, while Alma and Seth are discussing what to do. And he basically presents to her that he thinks they should either completely sever ties with one another or run away together. She is sitting in this like really upright, she's trying so hard to like be cool about this. And he won't even like make eye contact with her. And it's hard to watch because she really obviously thinks that he's here to like dump her, I think is what she expects. Especially the way that they like hugged each other. I think, in that last episode, the way that it ended, you assume that they're both coming to terms with the fact that everything that they have had is over now. But here, it's clear that he's like trying to find a way to cling to all of this. And he can't even look at her because he's not even sure how to do that, but he needs something. And she, it feels to me, is trying to come to grips with the fact that it's over. And the fact that he won't look at her, she's taking as an indication that he's too ashamed to tell her, basically, I'm replacing you as somebody else now. And that's not it at all, in fact. He is just contemplating the ways that they can go about being together. And the only option that he can think of is to run away. Because they can't continue on with this dalliance that they have now with his wife in the camp. He's like, he says rightfully that will only add to her humiliation. And he's dead on. Like, that's just a cruel thing to do. And I know that he doesn't want to inflict that on her. And, she doesn't seem like a bad person. She's making the best of the situation. But he leaves with the understanding that she's going to like take the night to think about it. But they're going to have to decide this evening what they want to do. And really, that's the part that made me like lower my opinion of Seth so far, is that he would, and don't get me wrong, I know he chooses not to do this in the end, and I'm glad, but the fact that he entertained the notion of leaving these two, the Martha and William, in this house that he built, and then just bailing without saying anything to them in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, essentially resigning them to the tender mercies of the camp, is so unthinkable to me that the fact that he even mentioned it is, he's going to have to work hard to get my respect back after that, because these people traveled for God knows how long, and no, they did not tell him that they were coming, but they did not think they needed to. And I really get that, because he was building them a fucking house. So as far as they knew, whenever they arrived, they'd be welcomed and it would be fine. Well, who's going to look after them? He sort of assigns that to Saul. Saul, who's laid up, drugged from a gunshot wound that he acquired watching your back, and you're about to dump your family on him and run. Oh, really? That's some shit. I mean, fucking Jesus Christ, you know? I really appreciate how nobody else that hears of this plan even tries to hide their disapproval of it. Even the tutor, she's just like very honest, despite the fact that obviously this is not what Alma wants to hear at the moment. She tells her the truth about it and is like, look, I get that maybe you'd be happy for a little while. I get that it'd be exciting. I get that it would, in a way, feel like a freedom that you have not yet had. But also, you'd be constantly, like, in danger. Because God knows what this guy is going to bring down on you two. And I feel like that is a valid thing. Like, as much as Seth is the upright citizen in that he wants the right thing to happen, in that, and I say that with an asterisk because of this situation right now that he's considering, but he generally does want the right thing to happen. He also is violent and has a bad temper. And I could see them going from place to place and him like button heads with all kinds of people. And also Alma's reputation would be shot all to hell. But at the same time, she has enough wealth from her claim that I don't know that matters. That's the lovely thing about being independently wealthy, is that you can just say screw it to society and do whatever the fuck you want. So, you know. But generally, I have to say how much I approve of this tutor, because she doesn't really mince words. She's cautious in how she presents what she thinks, but she doesn't hide it or try and sugarcoat or anything like that. And I even like the fact that Alma, despite clearly not wanting to hear what this woman has to say, when the tutor says something like, please don't be angry with me, Alma says no in a way that, like, basically, I'm not angry at you. Like, she's not trying to blame this woman. It seems like she really is hearing her. And later on, what winds up sort of changing Alma's mind, because she's clearly considering running away, is the idea, and it's not clear to her if this is what Seth wanted or not, but the idea that he might expect her to leave Sophia behind. And she can't even consider that. And I can't tell you what a pleasant surprise that was. Because frankly, taking on the care of a little girl is something that I think a lot of people in Alma's position would view as a temporary inconvenience. And would be willing to leave. They'd be willing to leave her with maybe the tutor herself, you know? I don't know what she thought she was going to do, but I guess she just assumed she'd take Sophia with her when the two of them ran away. I don't necessarily think Seth expected her to leave Sophia behind, but even if, like, they didn't discuss that, and I think she's realizing that that would also be unfair to this little girl who's been uprooted, lost her family. It has not been that long since this girl's entire family was murdered. And giving her a sense of stability and a place that she can, like, put down roots in a way. I hate to say that about this camp because I don't want her to put down roots here, to be honest. But yeah, she's got a tutor. She's learning. She's learning about different people and becoming friends and recognizable and learning how to speak and read, and tearing her away from this. Like, what do? You run off with Seth and you bring Sophia and you bring the tutor? Like, there comes a point where, what are you really getting out of leaving? So I appreciate, and I also really appreciate the way that she says it. She says something about, like, abandoning this little girl, the selfishness of that. And then she doesn't say, like, I couldn't do that. She says, I'd be too afraid, which I think is a very revealing line. I'd be too afraid. That means a lot. Like, I'd be too afraid of what precisely? I'd be too afraid of the judgment of other people, possibly the judgment of God, depending on how religious she is. It's not really that clear how much Alma subscribes to religion. There's no reverend in the camp anymore that I know of. But I just can't really... I like the fact that she sort of admits, it's not even that I feel it would be wrong. I don't feel that in my heart. It's that I know it would be wrong. And I'm afraid of the consequences of that, which is a very different thing. And I have been in that position myself where I have known something is wrong in my intellectual self. But in terms of my gut, I don't feel wrong about it. And that has bothered me. That feeling of separating completely the morality of something from my personal opinion and reaction to it. That makes you feel like you're losing your morals somehow. And maybe you are. And I understand exactly what she's saying here in terms of where her priorities lie in that regard. She can't do it, not because it's the wrong thing to do and she couldn't live with herself. She couldn't do it because it's the wrong thing to do and she doesn't know what would happen. And that's valid. And what I think a lot of us don't realize in the moment when we're making a decision, that we know the thing we want to do is technically wrong, but is not feeling wrong to us at the time. What we fail to understand a lot is that with time, the feeling of how wrong it is will catch up with us. And we may not feel it in the moment because our desires are outstripping our morals. But eventually, the morals will begin to rise to the level of our desire. And then we're going to have to look in the mirror and deal with the consequences, both of our actions and of our denying the morals and their effect on our psyche, because that is a really tough thing to do. I've been dealing with that over the past few years, and I've finally started to come to terms with it. But in terms of, like, how I got together with Owen, for example, I knew that the way that him and I were attached to each other and talking while I was still married was not okay. But I was so invested in him that I could not tear myself away, and I could not even make myself feel like it was the wrong thing. I knew it was, but I couldn't feel that. And we wound up together, and I then had to wade through the delayed feelings of grief and regret and guilt that I wasn't feeling back when everything was so new and fresh and exciting. And it's a tough thing, I think, for your partner. Like, Owen had to watch me coping with that after the fact, after I had already made my decision and was with him. And that's a really difficult thing to watch a partner go through. And I feel like both Seth and Alma would have to watch the other suddenly come to their senses and deal with the fact that they chose to leave somebody that they, if not cared about really, I think at least feel responsible for. And the guilt suddenly surging from that, and then them trying to maybe backpedal on what they had decided to do. And, you know, as much as you may have some joy and fun and be in love, that kind of thing can overshadow it and make it feel like it wasn't worth it. Luckily, I don't feel that way, but I could easily see how that can happen. And I'm just really glad they both seem to come to their senses. So yeah, anyway, he presents this to her, this whole thing. We have the scene with, Saul getting doped up, and, Charlie, he's deciding what he's going to do, in terms of backing up Seth. And he decides that it would be good to get another weapon. And Merrick is asking Charlie later, why do you think you need to get another weapon? Didn't you hear him say that he's planning on getting his badge and his gun back? And Charlie's like, yeah, and don't you think that he maybe needs some backup when he does that? It just goes to show how little Merrick really understands the situation and understands how dire things really are. I don't know. It's just really, it's kind of funny to me that Merrick is so clueless despite being an intelligent guy. He just doesn't really seem to understand what it is that they are dealing with here in terms of the possibility of Seth still dying, despite the fact that he was able to escape this fight alive this time around. So yeah, perhaps with the ringing in your ears, you didn't hear Mr. Bullock say he'd get his old weapon back. And Charlie, you think maybe a new one might be useful to Bullock arranging his old one's return and more backing his position? Because obviously Merrick thinks that he can just turn up and just demand his stuff back and that Al's going to hand it over. He doesn't know how things have been left, and the fact that him continuing to be sheriff is very much up in the fucking air right now. So yeah, he has this moment with Saul, and Saul tells him exactly what he thinks. And it's great. Saul is so understated and so restrained so much of the time. And now that he's high as balls and injured on behalf of his friend, may I remind you, he has no goddamn time for this. He's so irritated. Like, dude, I'm laying here high as a kite with a fucking hole in my chest because of you taking offense at this man rightfully calling you out for something that you were very much actually doing, by the way. And you are still about to dump that whole load on me and run away. Are you serious right now? Yeah. You know what, Saul? Let him have it. And I love it. He just calls him a cocksucker and then says, and I like saying cocksucker, so what do you think of that? Whole thing is so good. So he leaves, and he's really, like, Seth leaves, and he's sort of trying to head back on to the gym. It appears to, like, finish this fight. And Charlie slows him down. Thankfully. Charlie pretends, I believe. He pretends, sorry, I said she because Patrick just wrote, I love Trixie too. She hates Seth so much. Yes. Trixie has the measure of Seth. Can I just say, I have really liked Seth up until this point, but Trixie is correct. She keeps calling him a selfish, self-deluded motherfucker, things like that. She is right. She knows. I love her. And she's like completely, she still has his back because she knows that, like, when it comes down to it, she is on Saul's side, and Saul, for whatever reason that Seth doesn't deserve, is still on Seth's side. But she is under no illusions in terms of Seth's actual morality concerning all of this. So yeah, he heads out. Charlie pretends to grow faint because of his injury and sort of slows Seth down. And they begin talking about his family. I don't know how much of this is actually Charlie's design and how much of it came up by accident because it was already on Seth's mind anyway. But I like to think that this was Charlie's design because let us not forget that Charlie used to be Wild Bill Hickok's second in command and had probably had to talk his old boss down from the ledge a couple of times. In the end, he wound up not being successful. But I really like to think that he sees the danger in the air and knows how to play someone to distract them long enough that it calms down the hotness of their temper and their impulse to do harm. So I'm going to give Charlie a lot of credit. And I'm not sure that he deserves it, but I feel pretty confident that he deserves a lot of it. And he turns Seth to talking about his brother and the kind of relationship that they had and how he wound up dying and the circumstances surrounding his burial, which it turns out Seth is like, he was going to be buried in Mexico where he died, and Seth was able to get his body back. And as he's talking about it, he gets really choked up and begins to cry. And Charlie, trying to save Seth some embarrassment, is like, well, I gotta take a shit, so I'm gonna go. So I fart away from you because I'm a gentleman. He's gonna leave him alone to cry. Who should turn up at this point but Jane? We already saw her earlier, where she hilariously, guys, I can't tell you, I was laughing so hard, is hanging upside down from her saddle. She made some sort of weird contraption because she rides drunk so often that she falls off constantly. So she made this contraption to keep herself from falling off, but got tangled up in it. So she fell anyway, but now she's hooked to it by her ankle and is too drunk to extricate herself. And the doc comes out and has to like let her down. Well, now she's like wandering around the camp and he tells her that Charlie Utter has a room for her. And she wanders over and just yells, "Fuck you too," as Seth is in this like emotional fucking moment and about to be left alone to his like, you know, his memories and nostalgia. She fucking tramples all over that shit, and it is so inopportune and so funny. I love the fact that she's on Seth's side, even though Seth clearly like cannot take her. I wouldn't say can't stand her. Like, I think he kind of likes her in his way, where he finds her amusing, but she's definitely in a lot of ways just a liability. But yeah, when she hears that Seth has a bone to pick with that limey cocksucker, which I have to say, guys, they keep talking about Al as if he's English, and I guess he's supposed to be, but does he have a British accent to anybody? Because I don't think he does. And people keep talking about it like it's there, and I'm not hearing it. But regardless, she doesn't like Al. So as far as she's concerned, if Al is Seth's enemy, then Seth is her friend, and she is going to back him up. And Patrick says the actor does, Al doesn't. Then why do they say that? I don't really get it. He doesn't sound any different to me than anybody else. But anyway, so they go over there to have their confrontation with Al concerning everything. Let's back it up and talk about Al and Doherty and Silas, because these two are taking their animosity towards each other out on everybody else. Now, I'm going to need, because I've watched this episode twice now, and I'm going to need some kind of help deciphering what happens here. But bear with me, y'all. So the first thing is Silas tells Al, by the way, Yankton is scared of Bullock. And Al immediately is like, well, wait, what the fuck? Like, clearly Al was kind of planning on, like, taking this dude out. And now he has to reconsider everything. And Silas says, till Congress approves, nothing's to say the hills get made part of Dakota. And continues on with, far as that, Montana's got pulled, Dakota don't. Montana's got silver for bribes. And it isn't fresh money to the game. And Yankton thinks Bullock's a Montana man. So just the fact that he was there in Montana and was apparently the favorite of a judge that wanted him in politics, they think that he has some pull and that maybe he's here on behalf of the judge to suss things out and get involved in the politics here and have connections back in Montana. And Dan, rightfully, is like, if anybody thinks that he's anyone's man, they are a fucking moron. I mean, Seth himself does not know whose man he is. Al, I mean, Dan, you are so dead on. My dear sweet friend, I love you. I hate you because you're really kind of despicable in a lot of ways, but also I love you. And this is the only thing I think that winds up saving Seth's life later. But yeah, so this could be something that he can turn to his advantage. So Al has to sort of restrain himself. In the thoroughfare, as I readied to stab the cocksucker, why did you have no impulse to hint at this? And Silas says the moment didn't seem right. Oh, Silas. That man is sexy, I gotta say. And I love this moment because they're clearly having a little bit of a, like, frisson of friendly chemistry. And Dan is watching and gets very, like, irritated by it and sort of tries to insinuate himself into the conversation and puts his gun down and sort of sidles up and, like, puffs his chest out when he looks at Silas and then glances over to make sure that Al's not taking this guy too seriously. Would Bullock dead curb Montana's interests or incite them to a stronger expression? And Silas honestly says, I really don't know. So they have to figure out how they're going to play this. Now, as they're standing here talking, this dude comes in. And this is the part that I had a little trouble understanding. Because they all have a pretty strong reaction to seeing him walk in. And this dude is apparently Silas's partner. But I don't really understand what he's doing here. And I don't understand why everybody has the reaction to him showing up the way that he did. I'm going to read this as he's coming because they're like, it's Al at this point talking to Tom Nuttall and discussing the clouds on the horizon regarding Doherty and Silas. And it seems like this guy's appearance sort of like is what pushes them to the boiling point when they had been just barely restrained in their viewing one another as outright enemies. At this point, this dude saunters in his fucking bowler cap. And I do not get the significance of this. But this guy comes in and immediately Silas goes over to him and says, "What the fuck?" And the guy tells him, "You aren't going to believe what happened to me, boss. If Kate Hog Ranch is part of this story and fucking that half-breed, go ahead and try me." I have no idea what that means. And he says, "That's not what detained me." And he says, "That's not what I'm angry about. Next time, don't fucking catch up." What does this mean? I don't understand any of this, guys, and I feel like I'm supposed to. don't catch up. Like, I don't understand. So if anybody out there is able to educate me on this, please help me out. But yeah, he says stopped to help stranded sisters. I don't know. I don't get it. In any case, he like yells at the guy and comes and sits back down, and Al sort of teases him by saying, "Wow, what a severe reprimand." Like, he really is not impressed. And Doherty goes up to this guy and picks a fight with him because he wants to fight Silas, but he can't. So the best thing that he can do is to fight Silas's friend and pretend it's because this guy was not fulfilling whatever it was that Al expected for whatever reason. I don't even get it. But basically, he picks a fight with this dude and almost kills him. He comes really, really close. Meanwhile, Silas wants to defend the guy and punch the shit out of Dan, but he cannot do that. So, Slippery Dan, another Dan, is off to the side cheering on Doherty, and Silas decides to take exception to that rather than to Doherty, and grabs the dude and shoves him up onto a stag that is hanging off the wall and kills him, impaling him on the antlers of this stag. That shit was super gross and horrible, and god damn, I really was like, even the second time I watched it, I went, oh god. Like, I knew it was coming, I knew what happened, but it was still really hard to watch. And I just don't know what to make of the offense that this guy caused. I just don't understand what he did. In any case, Doherty is still beating the fuck out of this dude. And Al fires his shotgun and then points it at Dan and tells him, I'll fire this into your head. Don't doubt me. You better back off. And Dan loses his mind and is up in his room when Al goes up there, sobbing, crying, because he feels like Al has finally declared himself and is now going to officially sort of disown him as his second in command and choose Silas over him. It's simultaneously pathetic and sort of sweet and understandable and really sad and funny, you know, like, yeah. And anyway, what Al winds up saying to sort of like diffuse the situation is, dude, I wasn't taking his side. I wanted you to stop because that was the right thing to do right now. But I definitely did not want to shoot you, and notice I didn't. I told you that I would use it, and you believed me, and I didn't have to. So yeah, he says, what is it that, oh yeah, I persuaded you I'd use it in order that I didn't need to. Dan keeps on crying, and Al says, where you or me would have slammed that hoople up and done it, planted him back and twisted the cocksucker till all the points of that buck's rack showed out his chest, and then done it twice more in case the fuck mistook the first for accident, what did Adams do? And Dan says, he fucking walked away. And Al says, different man from you and me. Whatever looks ahead of grievous abominations and disorder, you and me walk into it together like always. And he hands him back the shotgun. And Dan says, as you'd never say to Adams. And he spits in his hand and says, as I'd never say to Adams. And they shake hands, and it's clear that Dan wants to give him a hug. but just shaking hands makes Al wince because of his friggin' ribs being broken. And it's like, I love this scene, but I also hate it because I just feel like it's so sad. I just feel so bad how dependent Doherty is on Al's approval. I just feel bad about it. Patrick is saying, I think it's just that Hawkeye is kind of useless as a partner and a fuck up. Al hasn't liked him since the first season when he's called him Silas's butler. But why is it like what did Silas mean when he said next time don't catch up? What does that mean? Because it feels like he did something specific that he wasn't supposed to do, and I don't understand exactly what it was that he fucked up on. And maybe I'm not supposed to get it, but I get the feeling that I'm supposed to get it. I don't know. But regardless, it feels like things are kind of settled finally between Dan and Al. And I mean, Al isn't going to do anything. Having Dan's support, it's not like Dan isn't super valuable. Silas is just a little bit more intelligent politically. But having somebody who's got your back in a brute force kind of way like Dan does is kind of like irreplaceable, you know? So yeah, I really believe that if it came down to a choice, Al would pick Dan because he knows that man is loyal to his last breath. But he doesn't want to lose Silas either because that man has some insight into what's going on in the landscape that Dan will never be able to get. So, you know, what are you going to do? All right. So backing it up, we'll talk about what's going on with Cy and his meetup with his people because it's like a pretty intense scene. We only see Cy for the first couple of minutes of his monologue here and don't ever get to see what's going, like who he's talking to for a good long while. He says, I believe in fostering people's tries and improving themselves. I think you also all know that I got a special fondness for Joni Stubbs. And if those things wasn't true, in this camp, at this precise juncture, I, Cy Tolliver, would not have backed an exclusively high-end whoring operation at the far fucking end of the camp without concealed access for its trade. But be that as it may, and wishing Joni Godspeed, and then the camera finally turns, and we get to see who all is here. Lila, who is his favorite, and I believe on her way to taking Joni's place as his, like, supervisory woman. Jack, who is the bartender, who we've seen a little bit from, and I'm interested to see if they do anything more with him. Stapleton, who is the scumbag, disgraced ex-sheriff. And Leon, who is the addict from the previous season that was allowed to live merely because he was Cy's man and not Al's. And he says, this congregation gathers so that I can assure each of you that our operation here, the Bella Union, is organized exactly to capitalize on what this camp is ready for and what it's going to become. And as he's talking, they all sort of flinch every time he, like, pounds his hand on the table. Like, they're all really clearly afraid of him, which is understandable because this man has the vibe of somebody who is about to go off like a fucking firecracker at any moment. I want each of you to take one of these, and he holds out a bunch of coins, as a gesture of optimism and goodwill. And I'm very curious exactly what he means by this, because he doesn't put forth a plan that we see in the scene here. It winds up cutting away as he's in the middle of this conversation. So I'm not exactly, I assume that a lot of it is spying. And when he says what this camp is about to become, I figure that he's, like, investing, but I'm not exactly sure what he thinks this camp is about to become. I'm just really not sure what Cy's overall plan is here. Obviously, he wants to outdo Joni, but I don't know what that looks like. I don't really understand the politics of everything well enough to like make a guess on that. Patrick is following up about the thing with Silas's butler. To me, it sounded like Silas was just being tough with him because Al was watching. I don't think where Hawkeye was matters much. Huh. Okay. It's just like the way that they see when he walks in, how Silas immediately goes up to him and just says, "What the fuck?" It's just like, what? What did he even do? But whatever. It doesn't matter because in the end, he gets his face pounded in. So, all right. We have that fight. That whole thing goes down. And then we have the conversation between the tutor and Alma, and her sort of coming to the realization that she's not going to be able to go. We have one scene of a hooker shoving her thumb up Al's ass for some reason. I'm not sure exactly medically what this is supposed to do, but evidently it's not doing what it's supposed to do. Like it's evidently very, very painful. And I think it's like supposed to force movement on something that's like stuck, but it isn't working out for him. And finally, he tells her to stop. He's like in so much pain, he could barely talk. He tells her to stop. He tried to pull away from her and she like followed him, and he's like, "Why would you do that?" Which I found very amusing. And then as she's giving him a blowjob, he's ranting and raving at her about what he thinks of Seth and his whole like attitude towards everything and the way that he has sort of carried himself. And as he's getting this blowjob, Seth yells up there, "Swearingen, you have 5 minutes to come out with my badge and gun." Seth is being backed up by Charlie and Jane. And even though she can't stand this motherfucker, Trixie goes and tells Saul about it. And Saul forces himself out of bed. She gives him a pistol because he's got a shotgun. And she's like, "Dude, if you use that with your injury, you will literally pass out from the pain of the recoil. Like, that is not good. So here." And Al says, "That Bullock's a strategist, ain't he? Sets terms to publicly humiliate me. And my penalty, if I don't comply, is he walks into the bar downstairs and takes 15 bullets in the chest. And that ain't no hooplehead. Bullock's one of those special fucking cases. You don't know what in fuck's going on in their mind, and he's big with Montana." And he's saying all this to this poor girl who's sucking him off and has no idea what he's fucking talking about. And he says, "Big, I heard that today because the news earlier from Yankton and the fucking commissioners wasn't adequately confusing, not to mention the fucking Telegraph coming in and 4 whores that I don't know who the fuck they work for." And this is personally my favorite part. I suppose I do fucking understand. So fucking confused and disgusted with and wanting it to end and looking for the blessing of a quick way out, sets himself to a higher fucking standard than our natures, and he wants execution because he's failed. Which I think he's right. And Trixie also seems to think he's right because she says to Saul, "Your friend wants to fucking die." And as much as I understand the appeal of that, that's a really selfish, shitty thing to do. So everybody sort of got Seth's number, is what I'm saying. Seth's acting like he's like really got the upper hand morally, and he doesn't. Like, everybody knows what the fuck he's doing. So Al decides to be measured about this, and he comes out with the gun and the badge, and he hands them to Seth, and he says basically, "I know you're dealing with some shit, and We all are. And I think that you need to figure it out while you're in this camp, because running off doesn't fucking help anything. It comes to me just a few minutes ago that the Reverend Smith, may he rest his soul, was found on the road, apparently murdered by heathens just some months ago. What he said on the subject of you, Mr. Bullock raises a camp up, and I hope he'll reside with us and improve our general fucking atmosphere for a good long fucking time. Even with all the personal complications and fucking disasters that we all fucking have, and where running away does absolutely fucking nothing. Now, Reverend Smith, that's not the Reverend that passed away, that Al sort of killed. Why does he say killed by heathens? They all know that he had like a brain problem, right? I'm not wrong about that, am I? Why does he say found on the road, killed by heathens some months ago? Isn't the way he died like common knowledge? Like, I don't understand. What is he talking about? We saw, and I assumed that he got buried like the way that he wanted to be buried. Why was he found on the road? I wouldn't think that, like, you know, he's not going to lie to Seth about that. Seth's been in the camp and would have heard exactly what happened to this guy. I am soups confused by that. So I don't know, guys. I feel like I'm falling behind in terms of like understanding what people are talking about in the show more than usual this episode. And I'm really not, like I said, I've watched it twice and I'm reading their dialogue word for word here to you all. And I don't understand what he's talking about, because there's no reason for them to frame up exactly what happened to the Reverend when everybody saw the man deteriorating. Everybody knows he was ill. So what the fuck? But anyway, he quotes him at Seth. And when he says we're running away solves absolutely nothing, Seth glares at him in this way that to me looks like he's actually shaken. And seems to really hear it. And takes his gun and badge. And then says to Al, "Did you find my hat?" Which I swear to God, I fucking cackled. And the way that Al looks at him with that big fucking eye, because the other one's all swelled up. That big eye, like this motherfucker. I could not handle it. I was laughing so hard. And she finds the hat. May she sail it down, or would that be degrading? I love that he even asks that. It's so good. So she tosses the hat back down and finishes off this conversation with, "I wish her aim was as good with her thumb," and then walks away and kind of grins to himself as he's walking inside. And he passes by Trixie, who's pointing a rifle at him, and I think he sees her, but I'm not positive. There's no real way to tell that he sees her. I think he does. And Seth looks up and sees the widow watching from her window, and she draws the curtains. And I think that she realizes that him taking back his gun and badge means that he doesn't plan to leave. And he left his watch, I think, in her room, and she hands that off to the tutor, Miss Isringhausen, and asks her to return that to Mr. Bullock as soon as she gets the chance. And I just feel really bad because the widow is obviously like heartbroken and trying to cope with what she knows is the right decision for both of them, but fucking sucks, because that is the way that life can be sometimes. And she has to go over and like tuck Sophia in and sort of remind herself, I think, of why she's doing what she's doing. Patrick is saying, in real history, that was a story about how Reverend Smith really died. I think going along with the theme of a lie agreed upon for the episode, everyone agreeing to the story of the Reverend dying because he was killed by heathens is a better story than the slow death we saw. Interesting. Interesting, maybe. And, like, I guess, you know, if you're trying to create more racism, there's no better way than to be like, oh, yeah, the heathens killed the fucking Reverend. Lovely. Great. I'm sure the Reverend would be so delighted to hear that his death was being lied about in order to create hatred against another group of people. I don't know. Maybe he would be. Maybe he hated the Sioux. We didn't really get a good sort of look at his stance on all of that, which I'm, for one, grateful for, because I don't really want to know. But that's a fucking bummer. So then we have Merrick, who's chasing down. He tries to talk both to Seth and to Al to find out what the hell actually happened here, because everybody has seen both confrontations. So it's going to be all over the camp, and I feel like he thinks it's going to be an embarrassment if they decide not to publish anything about it. It's going to look like they're completely clueless, which they actually are. And Seth goes up to Saul and tells him thank you for having his back. But Saul just says she can situate me about Trixie. And doesn't really even, like, look at Seth. I think that as far as he's sort of concerned, he's kind of done. I think he's sort of trying to let go of just sort of realizing he can't depend on him, you know? And that's just a shitty feeling to have about a friend. Like, he went into business with this guy. He moved, you know, halfway across the country for this dude. Maybe not halfway, but, you know. And to realize that this guy was about to just bail on you after everything you did for him has got to be a really shitty feeling. So, anyway, we have a moment at Joni's place where there's, you know, very first setting up this whorehouse, and she is telling this dude that $2 is not ever going to be enough for him to get any pussy. And he asks for one of the girls to flap her skirts at him so that he can at least get a whiff before he runs out of there. And as he runs out, we see EB standing there thinking that he's being real subtle as he spies on them. But I love the fact that he's not at all. There's a rodent-looking creature lamping one of your barrels. Pay him no heed. That's the mayor. I love it. I love it so much that they're calling the mayor a rodent-looking creature. I love that she knows exactly who she means. So Merrick, when he talks to Al isn't going to actually tell him the truth about everything that happened. But he says, within the limits of decency, I choose, because obviously he can't be like, oh, well, it was down to cunt. He flipped out because of cunt. At worst, I will not interfere. The story is true and decent. I would define as true and decent in such an endeavor the facts rendered fully within social standards and sensibilities without bias or abridgment. So Al says, why do I imagine a snake swallowing its tail? Which I think he has this much more correct than Merrick does. And Al basically just comes up with this whole, like, it's sort of a almost nationalist, what's the word I want? It's not a speech, but like a treatise that he like recites to Merrick. And I can't help but wonder if Merrick actually published something like this. What would foster the illusions of further commerce? And he begins his monologue, and as he does it, we get to see all of these different scenes. So what he's saying is, tonight, throughout Deadwood, heads may be laid to pillow, assuaged and reassured. For that purveyor for profit of everything sordid and vicious, Al Swearingen, already beaten to a fare-thee-well earlier in the day by Sheriff Bullock, has returned to the sheriff the implements and ornaments of his office. I love how he's reciting all of this because it's exactly what the fucking newspaper would sound like. Without the tawdry walls of Swearingen's saloon, the Gem, decent citizens may pursue with a new and jaunty freedom all aspects of Christian commerce, in which connection we particularly recommend, and there you throw in the names of a few businesses who have paid you a good-sized average. And as he's saying this, we have him going home to the house that he built, to his wife Martha. And it's incredibly formal. It's really weird to me that she calls him Mr. Bullock the whole time. And he puts his gun and badge next to William's bed so that he can see first thing in the morning that his dad has got them back. And then Martha says to him, I see that you put a bundling board into the bed. And a bundling board is a board that was used to separate a bed into two sides so that members of the opposite sex could sleep in the same bed with no fear of them actually having relations. And she says, I hope you won't object that I've removed it. And he kind of gets a look of surprise and says, no. And then they go upstairs together, I assume, to bone, because that's basically her being like, are you cool with having sex tonight? And him being like, I guess. And I can't help but think that I would react in much the same way as she does if I got to see Mr. Oliphant's face covered in blood as the first thing I got to camp with. But yeah, that's the end of the episode, is him going upstairs with his wife and I guess consummating their relationship. I'm not sure if they ever have before or not, but I don't think so based on the fact that he put that bundling board in. I would assume that they had not. So that's a pretty big step. And I can't help but feel really bad in a lot of ways for Alma because she's going to have to know. There's going to be she'll be able to tell. And I just, poor Alma. She's really been put through the ringer, man. But yeah, so that's the end of the episode. I am over my time, I think, a little bit, but that's okay. I don't have anything following this, so that's fine. But yeah, so there were a few things that confused me this episode, but I still really liked this one. And I am really interested in the way that they have included a couple of newbies with the jumping ahead in time, how things are going to shake out. And I really want Cy Tolliver to die. I doubt he will, because he's just one of those kinds of people that's just he'll be one of the people who makes it, because shitty rich men tend to be fine. But I want him so badly to be murdered, and murdered by somebody he never saw it coming from, betrayed from within his own ranks, in some really humiliating way. That's what I want. But I'm going to guess I don't get it. We'll see. Anyway, all right, guys, I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you again very much to Patrick for commissioning a whole first season in the beginning of this season. Happy birthday again, because I'm recording this the same day as the last one, so it's still his birthday. And I hope that you guys have all been enjoying the coverage, and I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers!
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.